I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to think about thinking. That may sound easy, almost trivial, but I assure you it is not. Well, you will see. You may think that we are thinking all the time, like what shall we have for lunch, whether we should go into work today or play hooky and call in sick. Indeed, that could be the kind of thinking I'm going to talk about if you think hard enough about it. If you think about what to eat, and then think about why you are eating at that particular time, 12 noon, instead of an hour later, and what is it that shapes your choices of food. Why meat? Why rice? What is required to support this entire effort from farms to slaughterhouses to supermarkets, where everything is so sanitized, nice and cool, indeed the refrigeration that is required to keep you from being poisoned by the very thing that is supposed to give you life. And who is profiting from it all, and is it in the right way? Okay, let that be a teaser of what is to come. I'm going to draw on Hannah Arendt's lecture entitled Thinking and Moral Considerations, but I'm going to do so in a way that is not merely going to be a synopsis of her thoughts, but instead to think about thinking myself. I think she would approve. As I was saying, you may think we are thinking all the time, but some, like Socrates, thinks that many of us are actually sleepwalking through life. We let others decide for us, think for us. Like what time you should arrive at work or school is not something you had thought through and determined to be optimal for you. If it was left to you, would you choose to wake up at 5 a.m. so that school can begin at 7:30? Obviously, this time of 7:30 a.m. wasn't chosen to suit your biological need for rest, but for other reasons, for instance to spread out the traffic conditions so that rush hour isn't more terrible than it already is, in order that workers and school children don't all rush for the same resources of transport and road space at the same time. If you do think about it, you can understand why. We live in a society and many of us live in cities. Spreading the demand out seems to be a good idea. But prior to me talking about it, did it occur to you? Somebody obviously had put some thought into it. It was driven by a problem such as choke traffic and parents being late for work resulting in lowered productivity. Then once the solution was figured out, we no longer, as individuals and as a collective, needed to think about it anymore. We can reduce our cognitive load simply by abiding with convention. It has been worked out, settled and henceforth just obeyed, and thinking about it can be put aside. For some things, shelving it might work, but for other conventions, they are sometimes rather silly and yet complied with. Things change over time and what might work previously may become a source of pain for the current times. So things need to be reconsidered, thought about again so that they can change to suit current needs. However, there is an inertia of the status quo which poses an obstacle for change. For some other conventions, no one seems to know quite how it became the norm or expectation, but defy them at your own peril. For instance, wearing a tie for men in formal settings. How does a tie actually fulfill the task that clothing was originally designed to do, such as to provide warmth, modesty and comfort? Wearing high heels for women. How does that make walking more comfortable or protect the feet, which is the purpose of shoes? But yet people wear ties and high heels, and to defy the convention can be seen as inappropriate. Your most comfortable piece of clothing may be pajamas or perhaps your underwear only, but try showing up for work in that. Thinking can be rather troubling. When you look closely at something, say with a microscope or magnifying glass, what is familiar can become strange. For instance, look at the back of your hand closely. You start noticing the lines, the way they shift when you clench your fist, the little discolorations you never quite noticed before, the little grooves, the imperfections. The same applies to concepts we thought we understood well. Arendt's example was of what a house meant, but I think more classic examples suit our purposes better. If you took the time to think about what love, justice, morality, time, knowledge and God means, it can feel like vertigo. You know what fairness means, right? Give each person what is due to him. But is what is due the same for everyone? If one works hard, you may think she deserves to be paid more than one who works less. But what if that person has more mouths to feed, is less able to work as hard because of age, sickness, disability, or simply capability? Should she be deprived of her needs? Should her kids have to go hungry? But if they earn the same salary, or even more despite producing less, is that fair? You know what love is, right? The love between two lovers, between friends, between parents and children. But if it is so simple, then why does it change over time? Why do parents say they love their children but yet punish them? Why do some abandon them, ignore them, or say hurtful things to them? What you thought you knew, you realize when you think about it hard enough that you don't. And just when you thought after a process of investigation that you now know, new situations arise to cast doubt on what you thought you had worked out. Like you are so angry with your spouse for cheating and lying that you thought you are going to divorce him. And then he gets a heart attack and your anger softens. The reason for your change of heart might not be intellectual. As my turn of phrase indicates, it was a change of heart, not a change of mind. Not everything is decided by thinking. Not everything can be decided rationally. Sometimes we act according to how we feel, which can be contrary to what is rational. His cheating and lying ways aren't about to vanish after he recovers from the heart attack, and you know this too. Yet you decide to stay. But I digress, though the digression makes an important point. Not everything is cognitive. Anyway, I was talking about how, when you think deeply about something, it becomes unfamiliar. What you thought you knew now becomes more uncertain. The ground you thought was solid has become shaky. After a while, you may no longer have any solid ground to stand on. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profane. So what is the point of thinking? My earlier example was about wearing a tie or high heels. When you did not think about it, you were just fine. But now, the more you think about it, the more resentful you feel. The discomfort you experience in them seems so unnecessary and serve no useful function as far as you can see. You decide not to. It might be the start of a new trend. You and others realize that there are no penalties for the non-compliance. In fact, there is no dress code. It was just something the first guy did and then the others followed. Or you might be put in your place. Your boss tells you off that you better come in heels and a skirt or else. Thinking for yourself can be a dangerous thing. You can give it up and dodge the bullet. Many do. That is why you observe people mostly falling in line, even with what not only does not make sense but can be downright harmful, for instance high heels to your ankles. Or being so skinny that it is unhealthy because the mass media has portrayed beauty to be bone thin. Wait a minute, you say. Yes, I may mindlessly wear a tie or heels to work, but my job requires a lot of thinking, making those slides for presentations or balancing the accounts or designing the next new machine for my company. Sure, we do think for the purpose of utility, thinking to do something useful. In addition, we see thinking in the form of students at school solving tough maths problems and postgraduates studying to acquire knowledge. Sure, that qualifies as thinking for the sake of gaining knowledge. And don't get me wrong, it is good to think in order to do useful things or gain knowledge, but Arendt believes that it is part of our human condition to think beyond the limitations of knowledge, to do more with his intellectual abilities, his brain power, than to use them as an instrument for knowing and doing. What was Socrates talking about when he said, "The unexamined life is not worth living"? What does it mean to examine our lives? Is it not to ask yourself, why am I making these slides or building this new machine? Why am I in this job, this industry? What do I want? What will make me happy? What does happiness even mean? In line with that, the thinking Arendt is thinking about when she wrote her lecture is a kind of internal inquiry, a self-talking, an internal conversation. Yes, thinking can be anxiety-inducing, in addition to the vertigo I mentioned earlier, to be unsure that what you are doing may not bring you to your goal. In fact, you aren't even sure what that goal might be, and enduring the mind-numbing routine of your labor, aren't quite sure what the point of it all even is. Thinking can be uncomfortable and destabilizing. For all the thinking that the best thinkers have done over thousands of years, they have for sure written many books, but the biggest questions like why are we here, or what should we do, remain unanswered. Even what may be simpler questions remain matters of debate, such as what happiness, goodness, and morality even are. Even the questions about thinking, what is the point of thinking, is not all that obvious, since thinking destabilizes our previously stable sense of life and self, and after much thought can lead to what the Greeks call aporia or uncertainty, where doubts remain unresolved and questions unanswered. It almost appears self-destructive. One approach out of aporia was adopted by the late academy, the skeptical approach, where they are skeptical about everything and want to suspend judgment. There is something to be said for that approach if it does leave the way open for new findings to inform theories. However, it can also lead to nihilism, where there is no truth to be found, no meaning whatsoever. Arendt decries this as just one more dogma, one more way to flee thinking, because the question has been settled, and so now no more thought about it is required. Besides, it is rather unnecessary to take a pessimistic view on knowing. Indeed, no definitive answer has been made on many issues despite thousands of years of inquiry, but it is not the case that there has been no progress. To describe the progress would be to describe the history of philosophy. Even if no definitive answer is yet found, it firstly does not mean that we will never be able to find it. And even if that is the case, we at least will know what are the boundaries of our knowledge, which is already valuable knowledge in itself, and even these remain open to contest. Secondly, sometimes no definitive answer exists, simply because, as there is a diversity of people, there is a plurality of ways of living, none of which is more right than the other. You prefer chocolate, I prefer vanilla. That does not mean one of us is wrong. Thirdly, what is suitable for one point of time may not be suitable for another. For instance, Thomas Hobbes thought that authoritarianism in the form of a monarch was the best system of governance during the 17th century. Plato thought that a philosopher king would be best, and democracy a bad idea. Today, many thinkers will argue as Churchill that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried. The world is a complex place, so we should not expect simple answers to the deepest questions. Thinking is firstly hard work and secondly potentially destabilizing. But thinking seems to be our lot. Thinking for its own sake is what differentiates us from other animals. Not to say that other living things do not think, but their thinking processes are directed towards utility, like how to hunt down that deer or escape from that tiger, or knowledge, like where the river is so that they can find water. Whereas in human beings, in addition to utility and knowledge, we think transcendentally. For instance, on the lower level, where is also found in animals, we eat to subsist. Can you think of any animal who questions the necessity of eating and survival? Yet people do wonder about this. Why do we even need to survive? What is the meaning of surviving? What is the meaning of living? So thinking is part of our nature. We cannot help it. Children are prone to ask why, questioning everything, but they stop doing so as they grow up. Did they stop because they have found the answer and found them satisfactory? Or did they stop because the adults in their lives have deadened their instinct to wonder? Thinking is human nature, but what is in our nature can be deadened. Should thinking be suppressed? Is the alternative of not thinking better though? Should we not think, not question, just go with whatever is the norm, whatever everyone else is doing, just to achieve some semblance of tranquility? Arendt thinks that such mindlessness can lead to evil. Her account of this is from her reporting of the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the Nazis' top officials. His basic defense is that he was merely acting on orders. He did his duty as he told the police and the court over and over again. He not only obeyed orders, he also obeyed the law, reported Arendt. She believes that he is not wicked or psychopathic, but instead a rather dull man just doing his job. Yet from this banal circumstance can come terrible and inhumane outcomes. That is one problem unthinking acting can cause. However, a common criticism of thinking is that thinkers are not doing. You may have heard people say stuff like, I am a doer, not a thinker. Is there any truth to that? Thinking's chief characteristic is that it interrupts all doing, writes Arendt. According to her, thinking and doing are incompatible. To think about an object in the real world, we do not need that object to be present. An object of thought is always a representation, merely an image in our minds. Likewise, when we are thinking, we are not acting. Not all actions require thinking, for instance the mechanical ones like brushing our teeth or walking. However, where to walk to does require some thinking, especially in novel conditions. If we don't know where we are going, we also do not know that we have arrived. For some, a drifter lifestyle wherever I lay my head, that's my home, may be a good way to live, at least for a while. If that is what you had thought about and decided, that is good and well. The danger is when we fall into patterns of living unconsciously, unthinkingly, and soon find it impossible to climb out of it. So there is a time for thinking and a time for action. Not all thoughts result in action. Indeed, some thoughts tell us to refrain from action. Arendt postulates that a conscience and the faculty of judgment are byproducts of a thinking consciousness from the internal conversation with oneself. While thinking is on generalized representations, on abstractions or what she calls invisibles, judgment is on particulars, on things close at hand. By relating the abstract to what really exists, we can then be able to make true judgments, though she does not quite explain how. For this we can turn to Arthur Schopenhauer. He thinks the mistake that is made in thinking is to play with concepts which are ungrounded in reality. If we go from what is real to form our concepts, we are on safe ground, but if our concepts become unhinged from anything real, that is where we end up in confusion. In conclusion, we live in a real world and we need to act. Even remaining inert or leaving it up to the crowd or the authorities to decide for us is a form of action, a decision taken despite not seeming to have taken any. Paradoxically, we act even in our inaction, and hence we must somehow decide even in the midst of uncertainty. We have to think, because whether we go with the crowd or act for ourselves, we are accountable for our decisions. It is our life, and if we live it on other people's terms and are in the final account dissatisfied with that, we have only ourselves to blame, since blaming others is futile and impotent. In today's world, there are many divisive matters such as the right to abortion, gender identity, homosexuality, the extent of religious authority, race issues, and the state of our democracy, just to name a few that people all over the world are confronting. Thinking's political and moral significance comes out only in those rare moments in history when things fall apart, the center cannot hold. At these moments, thinking ceases to be a marginal affair in political matters. When everybody is swept away unthinkingly by what everybody else does and believes in, those who think are drawn out of hiding because their refusal to join is conspicuous and thereby becomes a kind of action, writes Arendt. This is why thinking is radical, subversive, and dangerous. Thinking leads to questioning rather than accepting the status quo. It is an important first step that leads to taking the right action. Thinking may be uncomfortable, difficult, and sometimes lead to troubling conclusions. But not thinking, sleepwalking through life, is also untenable and in fact subhuman. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.